Hello everyone! Today I'm speaking with my friend Gaetan, who's in Singapore. Gaetan has been part of the founding team of Hmlet for the past 3 years, one of Southeast Asia's pioneer and largest co-living operators. His full bio is in the description below. In all my past conversations with Gaetan, I found him to be extremely knowledgeable and balanced in his perspective about how to build a commercially successful co-living business that prioritizes community and human connection. I hope that you find this conversation interesting and insightful. The intention of these conversations is to just speak with people that are passionate about community building and human connection, and to get their insights. So I thought, go ahead.
Happy to be on board.
I appreciate it.
Important.
Yeah, we're just kind of figuring out the rhythm of what these conversations feel like and flow like. So I'm grateful that you're down for this experiment. And I imagine that over the months the audience will continue to grow.
Very exciting.
We've done 4 conversations so far, and and then I've got even another one in a couple hours. So,
and they said things were slow in Bali. Nonsense.
Well, we have this phrase: you can take the New Yorker out of New York, but not out of the person.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, anyway, so I just wanted to introduce you and to have you share just a little bit about yourself and what you're up to in the world and how you got here as an introduction. Yeah.
So, as you might have figured out, my name is Gaëtan.
Gaetan.
As French as it gets. Wasn't born there, but I am a little Parisian boy. I ended up in Asia about 8 years ago. That's basically the beginning of my slow but steady transition into community and experience building. Started off very squarish as a financial analyst. Was coming out of law school, convinced that that's what important people did, and that's where the most change you could impart on the world was done. Did that for a couple of years. Obviously, not exactly what I thought the word impact stood for. But that led me onto startups, being at the ideation of things, at the core of things, and I think that's something that was very important for me with Hmlet. That from the very inception of our co-living spaces, the idea of bringing people together was basically one of the main pillars, if not the single most important one. I'll spare you the meandering over the years, but basically, hustling, startups, early days, trying to get these babies off the ground until about 3.5, 4 years ago, where one of the co-founders of Hmlet approached me to basically start off our operations in Singapore and structure what would become this community-centric real estate play that we've built, where basically we want to think of ourselves as the software of buildings. What happens inside of a space from a user's perspective once that transaction has happened, once somebody becomes a tenant or a member, which is not something that the real estate world has need to concern itself with for the longest time. You just sold the building, sold the unit, or rented out to your tenant, and then off they went. But yeah, with how urban city centers have evolved in the last few years, that need for rationalized price points that don't cut back on living essentials, which are clean, decent, airy, well-designed space, but also a sense of belonging, connection, and being plugged into a neighborhood. And so that's what we try to do, and how I ended up in all of this, figuring out as we went, basically. It was an iterative journey for myself of first off needing to figure out what this whole community, connection, belonging, accountability meant from a very pragmatic perspective, which is the business. We understood quickly that if we wanted stickiness, we wanted members to stay with us, we had to move past just providing with amenities. And so having to do it, basically, discovered a whole new world out there, which I think at this stage underpins a lot of how I want to contribute as a human being, as a professional, as a hospitality and professional in the coming years. That was long.
No, not at all. Not at all. So I mean, what have you found really exciting and successful in fostering community, and what have you found have been the challenges?
What's exciting is that you have a very very immediate results in a lot of things that you do, and I think that that was one of the things that we relied on to keep morale high in these trying times, both building up a company, but also more recently. I think there's a real sense of purpose that comes with it. You are doing something that is genuinely valuable, both in the instant, but also as it will progress. It works, I think there's this constant duel that should not be between, the hard stuff, the KPIs, benchmarking yourself against the best, running a tight ship, sort of numbers-driven management to some extent. And then on the other side, what people tend to consider the soft sphere of connection, belonging, sense of meaning, building upon others, networks versus hierarchies, the idea of sharing, giving, and being at the forefront of our community, you really see that these two worlds should coexist, that they absolutely need each other. And I think overcoming that dualism was something that opened my eyes to a lot of different ways of thinking of things, of figuring out what's really important. When you come to business from a structured and sort of B school or law or accounting, whatever, your perception of business is very biased. You don't realize it, but you're looking at a very small thing, crucial because it's the essence translated into numbers, so there's common understanding around the whole idea, but you're missing a huge part of it, which is how do you make the people feel inside of your product, inside of your company. I think that was a big learning for me. What's tough about it is that it's never over. You're never done. There's never a state of, okay, we now have reached community. Well, actually, you can reach that point, but you're not going to stay there for long. So I think there is that sense of, you always have to come up with more, with different, with better. Another tough thing is, I think that in order to be really respectful of your community, common intelligence, and the power of the group, as a leader, you need to be very comfortable quickly about the idea of doing nothing, proactively not taking steps or steering your community in any way or direction, just fostering that spirit where people respect each other, talk things out, decide to be accountable for each other. But you're not a cheerleader. You're also not a manager, and so this role doesn't exist in the business world as such. And I think it's a shame because the more we go, the more these facilitation roles will become critical, both internally and externally, of how do we get people to speak to each other in a way that's not just the distilled version of reality, which is a KPI, which is an OKR, which is a target, but also, what are the memories that we want to create as we go seek this goal or we build this community? And yeah, which is back to the earlier point. And I think finally, one of the challenging things is to get all of this across in a way that doesn't sound too esoteric and too, when you confuse ideals with intentions. And that's tough. That's tough because, as I think any community inclined person will figure out on their own, the more you dig into it, the more you feel to some extent detached from reality or from the day-to-day, but at the same time much more connected to the things underpinning this reality. But to close that loop and start, speaking in a way that doesn't sound like you just come back from a yoga retreat, in the context of a board meeting room, is challenging. So finding the right language, I think, is one of the tough things to do, but it can be overcome. Not entirely sure I'm there yet, but I think there is hope.
Yeah, it's you said something that specifically caught my attention in that, the role of the community facilitator is going to become more and more valuable in the future. And one of the things that I've seen is that, in this world where we're more connected than ever, yet at the same time feeling more disconnected than ever, people are craving community and connection, and yet struggling to do that.
Yeah.
And so the role of the facilitator becomes so important, and there's no instruction manual, and and for me, it's like a subtle art form. And so I'm curious as to what you found might be kind of like, whether you would say the secret sauce or like the methodology, or how do you design for connection? How do you create that nurturing environment? What are the things that make people feel safe to want to connect? Yeah.
I'd say it starts at zero. I'd give you a list of 1, 2, 3, but there is really that zero, that one step back, which is making your intentions as clear as possible about this objective of yours. Whether you're designing a space, a group, you need to make that intention clear. If it's just floating around and it's a nice thing to have, and it comes on top, then it will quickly be disregarded as, okay, what I was mentioning earlier, the soft bit, we don't need to, that's fine. Let's just focus on the objective here, which tends to be removed from that connection. So I think first stating very clearly your intention that this is something you're aiming to do. Then I would say pick the right people. Not everybody is a good facilitator. Not everybody has the inclinations, interests to do this well. What's worked really well for us is, as much as possible, we look for givers, people that concern themselves with the welfare of others as a general rule of life. I think it's always easier to start from a good base and then build from that, than convince somebody that, yes, life is not a zero-sum game, and that both can thrive at the same time. And, this is clearly a big distinction in the world today, and one, unfortunately, where a lot of very qualified, hungry, people who want to challenge themselves are drawn into this mentality, if they're not themselves convinced of it. So I think that's the first thing we did. The second one is, in whatever formal way that feels right, creating a sense of accountability in the individual joining the group. We were particularly well positioned to realize this with Hmlet, where we took a commercial service initially, something that you buy, that you exchange for money and get an agreed upon service for, into something where we started requesting things from clients, which is a very counterintuitive or sort of approach when you're looking at a capitalist, exchange of services. This is what I do. Do you want it? Yes, give me money for it. Therefore, you'll get that. When you're building a community, you're building connection, you're asking something of somebody to come in, you know, it's like, okay, give me your money. Now I'm going to ask you to do things. So you got to overcome that one. That is, again, depending on what feels right. It's either setting your intentions and making sure that people who don't want to do this don't come, or so if you want something a bit more diluted but broader based, figuring out what it is you're going to ask from people, house rules, general rules of engagement, behaviors, no-nos. And so there's like, you've got to dial it up and down, but you absolutely need to ask something from people, because entitlement, the idea of coming to a group expecting things or expecting to be served, kills any form of meaningful communication or connection. And then the third one, I think, would be to give it some time, you know. Do not press your community of users for results. Do not peg the viability of your business on members doing certain things versus not. You know, you got to let this group of human beings that you've been entrusted with part of the life with to grow and figure out on its own what it's going to look like. It's probably going to be messy. It's probably going to be much more messier than you want it. And that's when the doing nothing kicks in, where you want to, oh my God, I can't have this. This is not what I wanted to build. You can't have both worlds. You can't have the rigid clinical, you know, SOP, SLA world of business, and next to it a bunch of human beings that are trying to live their lives. Both of these ideas can't work together fully. You know, there needs to be compromise on both sides. And it's very tempting when you're running a business or a group to just go, okay, this is it, especially when it gets heated or you know, there's a challenge, a conflict, something to resolve. You're like, okay, fuck this. Now I'm going in there and making it square. You'll kill your group. You'll kill the connection.
Wow, there's some gems in there. So I also imagine that we agree that, you know, this is a very, very high value role, and these kinds of individuals oftentimes are not necessarily easy to find, and then as givers, oftentimes they can burn out quite quickly.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I'm kind of curious about, like, how has been your process in that?
So protecting them and giving them the role they need. It's not easy. There's two things. There's the internal considerations. So how do you inscribe the community manager within the larger organization? I think that's an iterative process. Again, make your intentions clear. If you have that guiding North Star, things will eventually align. And, you know, I speak in the context of Coliving, of a budding startup that went very fast, very quickly. Compromise is needed. But I think this also applies to any other organization. So have your principles, you know, in stone, but build flexibility into how long it takes to get to that ideal state. So be flexible about it, but don't let the ideals down. Training, you know, there's a couple of key skill sets that that community managers need to have, and they're not all put together in a convenient way, but there's definitely pockets of information that you can garner and put them all together. The idea there is to build in them a very clear sense of delineation between themselves, the business, and the member. It's very instinctive and very natural for the community managers to mix their lives into their work, because it feels so human. It feels so close to how they would build relationships in their own personal time that it can get blurred very quickly. So you need to make the mental line they will draw very clear. That's your rules, your processes, what happens when things need to be escalated. You need very strict sets of guidelines, not all encompassing. You can't basically SOP your way through life, but you need rules in place, well understood, and that protects the community managers and their mental bandwidth. You need to send them on holiday. We do have the absolute passionate individuals who just can't see themselves leaving their members for more than 10 days. So do send them off. Whenever they have off time, make sure that it is off time. We've experienced here and there with community managers living on premise. You need to make sure that members understand that this is off time. I would actually personally advise against having community managers inside of buildings. It's too complicated to handle. What else? And I think you need to I think this is the last one and probably the most important one. Empower your community managers. I'm always a big fan of empowering as much as possible the front lines. The cheapest way to solve a problem is the fastest. And so you want to make their lives as easy as possible and give them as much ammunition and recourse they need in order to deal with the problems as they come up. The last thing you want is a community manager who goes, well, let me go speak to my manager. Right. That does terrible things in the mind of the member, which goes, okay, what's this, a communication node? Why don't you just send me an email? And for the community manager, you feel powerless, and the whole reason why you joined was to help quick and fast and be effective. Now, there are certain things that need to be escalated, but as much as possible empower the community managers, because it's on the ground, and if they can fix quick problems fast, so be it. And that's what they do. Have official recourse mechanisms in place, very important, but as much as possible, let the front line take care of it quickly.
Wow. Okay, I've got a big question that I've been thinking about a lot. In a commercial business that requires capital investment,
I think I know where you're going with this one. Go
ahead. How do you sell the importance of paying community facilitators and community, managers, whatever you want to call them? I think it's more facilitation personally. Yeah. How do you go about that? I mean, it's been my experience that, these individuals are in a sense the salespeople. And they're also increasing retention.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, so I'm curious.
No, you're pretty spot on. The one problem we've suffered from is that we're often asked, okay, what is the KPI you contribute to? Is it net promoter score? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it cost of acquisition cost? Cost of acquisition? Is it, one of the traditional ways we have of measuring performance? The problem with what community facilitators do is that they're the oil in the mechanism, so you can't exactly pinpoint specifically what each contribution sort of amounts to, but you can definitely feel it when they're not there. And when they're not there, what happens? Customer satisfaction usually goes down. Why? Because operational issues take more time to resolve. They don't actually take more time. It's just that the process of having a member be more relaxed about a leaking faucet or a faulty aircon is handled by the community manager, who's going to make sure that that experience is not too painful, distressing, or whatever. I'm giving you a simple example, but it definitely has an impact on operations. The second thing it does is that it very quickly commoditizes your product. I'm specifically talking in the context of co-living, but I think it does apply to a lot of other businesses. In the sense that if you remove the human aspect of what you're doing, the value proposition that you sell to your members quickly reverts back to what I can see, what's tangible, my walls, my bed, my aircon, my lease. Mm-hmm. The moment you get into that territory, what happens is that people start comparing. And you have a product that doesn't sell itself, but a product that you need to sell through price. Now, if everybody starts doing that, prices will naturally start dropping because I'm going to undercut him, he's going to undercut me, etc., etc., etc. So I think that's, in a nutshell, the biggest role of the community manager, is making sure that this space is so engaging emotionally that the very idea of comparing it to some other product, which will be by definition pretty much the same, doesn't even materialize in the member's brain. Or if it does, there's things you can do about it. And then there's also, the facilitation, the customers, the branding, the how do you you brand your community not by showcasing it, but by providing its members with content, engaging content, and opportunities to connect, and for them to go spread the word, right? I think the facilitators are the single biggest driver of word of mouth, which, as we both know, is the most effective way of getting people in. But as you see, it's never direct. It's never them influencing with a budget or a spend that specific KPI. Because all of these things, can't be done just by themselves. The content can't be prepared by them. The operational issue can't be solved by them. The competition or the benchmarking against other co-living spaces alternative can't be done just by them, but they're at that linchpin, and that really is, in a way, the description of a facilitation role, but also why it's tricky. And I think we take a larger perspective on it. We are getting slightly more comfortable with these kinds of roles because we're moving away from understanding businesses and problems through detail, What we've done to the sum of human knowledge in the last 50 years is basically break it down, right? University teachers convincing themselves that biology had nothing to do with physics, that physics had nothing to do with economics, and those are very different subjects. And that's the way we've approached business. Marketing's there, sales is here, they speak to each other, but they've got nothing to do with member experience or with operations or with investment. In co-living, you have dynamic complexity in the sense that if I tweak something here, I'll have unintended consequences here and vice versa. So everything needs to move together. And the only way to align everybody together is to put the focus on the member experience, on the person you're doing this for. And that connection to the community comes through the community manager. So they have an overall alignment facilitation job that helps build the right product at the right price for the right people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And put the focus on who it is we're doing this for, which is the members, which also in turn conveniently gets more people excited internally. Because, if you understand that your product is changing the lives of people, you will take that calculated risk to go the extra mile, do something out, because you feel engaged with, serving and helping. Now, these are not immediately obvious things, and it takes time to have that conversation at strategic levels, but not impossible. And I think the world's views are changing about the importance of soft skill, of cohesion, communication, facilitation. We understand that we have access to the entire corpus of human knowledge. So the real next skill is putting it all together. And it's absolutely the job of community facilitators.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Switching gears a little bit, I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of what COVID is revealing for communal living, for co-living. What are, some of the challenges and opportunities, and then maybe kind of like your forecast for where you think things are going?
Well, the most obvious one is that we've added one extra element to the safety that we need to provide for our members, which is, our chief job. So on top of physical safety, we need to now provide physiological safety on top of the emotional safety. So it's a new spectrum for us to deal with. I think that's the most obvious consequence of COVID. The second is a positive one, I would like to think. I think that the entire planet was brutally awakened to the fact that human connection is absolutely core to our well-being. So I think that will add fuel to the discussion about how to integrate, community into these larger investor-run businesses. The third is, and this will touch upon my my projections for where the future of co-living is going, community building. We might need to edit this out. I have my dishwasher coming in.
It's all good.
So next thing on what COVID did for co-living is a call for nature. I think we've definitely seen that in our with our residents and members. Green becomes suddenly very, very much needed. Now, I'm not sure how this will pan out in the future, and if anything can be done during the COVID period. But I do think people have realized that getting outside of city centres is absolutely key. So that could be something that that operators latch on. Some sort of a network of operators coming together, offering both urban dwelling, city and countryside. I think that's definitely something that could pan out in the future. Otherwise, I don't think that. Obviously the last one, but I think it's still too soon to be felt now. But I think we've definitely moved into that moment of time. People will be much more willing to work remote and to be 3 months here, 6 months there. I think people will want to spend longer spans of time because in parallel to COVID, there's an ecological awakening that's also happening. That little innocuous trip to Thailand every year is actually pretty carbon heavy, and there are better ways of getting that sense of bewilderment and change. So I think that'll transfer into the whole play of people being willing to work remote. That the digital nomads is basically hitting mainstream. I think that's definitely one of the things that COVID will have brought us. Still too soon to be felt, but in the next 2-3 years, I think this mode of living will have become absolutely mainstream.
Yeah, I sitting here in Bali, I can't help but think that if we are having a drastic shift towards location independence in terms of working, and given the option, being in environments that are more connected with nature and provide a better lifestyle, more cost-effective lifestyle, become more attractive. And so then it begs to ask what happens to cities. Like what needs to happen to make cities attractive options in the future?
I would say continue down the road we've already engaged in. Rationalize space within reason. We have seen some absurd, propositions pop here and there of, the good old landlord tricks of trying to maximize occupancy by shrinking the size of rooms. It's not one I'm advocating, but continue rationalizing space. I think that two things will happen at the same time. People will understand that living with other people, strangers, at least at the beginning, is not an economic default choice, but a lifestyle choice. You don't do co-living because you can't afford anything else. You choose co-living. All smaller, shared spaces. I think that will happen. In parallel, we're also going to start rethinking our CBDs. There's a lot of space who's going to come up. The space will not be re-engineered into traditional multifamily homes. It's probably co-living or brainchild of co-living that will replace that. So I think, both of these trends are the ones I'm banking on to push forward on. To be excited about co-living. I don't think that the risk of contamination or the new risk of pandemic is going to change much. There's this narrative that if you put a lot of people in the same space, they'll be more afraid of catching a virus, whatever it is. It's obviously less pleasant to be quarantined in a room than it is in your full flat, but it's perfectly manageable. So I think that narrative won't withstand the test of time. I think that's it. We're going for more of it. I think it's just a question of when, not if. Our collective voices are getting louder and louder. A new generation is coming to power. Millennials in 5 to 10 years will be the dominant generation. Will be accessing places of power and decision. So I think the rate of change will only accelerate towards this more sustainable form of living in urban city centers. Or as the Arabs say, inshallah.
Wow. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I have, I think, one final question, which is a little bit of a curveball. What would you say is the best way that we can prepare ourselves for all of the changes that are coming to us at this moment in time?
I'd put the focus on building character. We are much more resilient to change than we ever thought before. We have access to much more methods for managing change internally than ever before. I think each one of us, in order for this transition to happen, needs to start becoming aware and accountable of their own mental welfare in periods of change and crises and transformation. I like to think that by putting the human back at the center of what we do with the new tools we have for understanding the human brain, for understanding connection, meaning, purpose, that every one of us can do something about it by working on themselves. And collectively, if we all do, there's no chance in hell we don't reach the same conclusions about what to do next.
And I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to connecting again with you soon.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, you have a great
Speak
one.
soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.